Hello, and welcome to the Full of Ship podcast. Real answers to real problems. With your host, Kyle Henderson, CEO and co-founder of Vision API, a podcast dedicated to demystify the chaotic, often turbulent world of ocean freight. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Welcome to another episode of Full of Ship. I'm your host, Kyle Henderson. And today we have Steven Weisensee of Port Jersey / Continental Logistics. Welcome, Steven.
Thanks for having me. How are we doing?
Doing great today. I really appreciate you taking time to speak with myself and the audience here at Full of Ship. Maybe to get the conversation rolling and introduce yourself to the audience, you could share a bit about, what's your role at Port Jersey / Continental Logistics, and maybe tell us a bit about the company.
Yep. So Port Jersey is the holding company. Continental Logistics is our brokerage arm. We have two more divisions underneath Port Jersey, which is Tyler Distribution and 21st Century Distribution. Tyler Distribution is our public warehouse entity down in Cranberry, New Jersey. And then 21st Century is a single source dedicated operation up in Edison, New Jersey. Continental Logistics is our brokerage arm. So do all the transportation for our warehouse customers. We're also located down here in Cranberry, New Jersey, and that's where my role comes in. I'm our senior sales representative on the brokerage side.
Understood. And what type of customers do you work with on the brokerage side?
Yeah, so big overlap between our warehouse customers and the customers that we focus on the brokerage side. We probably do 95% food. So food-oriented operation, go into all the major grocery DCs, do a lot of European importers, people that don't have logistics arms in the States, and then anyone else outside of our facility walls, obviously, that are also shipping food or food products going into your major grocery chains across the country.
Understood. And the firms you're working with to move these perishable goods, are you primarily working with like North American based cargo owners, or are you working a few steps removed from the shipper or the supplier? Who are you guys typically contracting with?
Yeah, so we're going direct to asset based carriers, guys that are local to our warehouse that we've used for years, and obviously any new carriers that are looking to join our network. Always looking for the food-focused carriers, the ones that are FSMA compliant, know the stuff that we're handling, know where we deliver into, and understand some of the challenges that sometimes come along with these grocery DCs. So we want to make sure that obviously when we get these guys underneath our feet, they know what they're doing and how to handle it, and obviously make sure that delivery goes smoothly as soon as it's picked up from start to finish.
So you got boots on the ground and operations on the brokerage side, on the warehousing side as well, a focus on the Jersey northeastern area in general. Would that be fair to say?
Yep, definitely for the warehousing piece. All four of our facilities are located in New Jersey, close to the port. That's where Port Jersey got its name from. We used to be off of Tyler Street, hence Tyler Distribution. So really niched in the New Jersey and Northeast market for the warehousing side. Obviously, on the brokerage side, we're a full-scale, full-fledged brokerage. We can do nationwide, but a lot of the freight is, concentrated in or out of Northeast markets.
You also mentioned that, and please correct me if I didn't hear correctly, Continental Logistics is the holding company, or is it Port Jersey was the holding company?
So, exactly. Port Jersey is the holding company, and then underneath that, you have 21st Century Distribution, Tyler Distribution, and Continental Logistics.
And you guys have bought up a few of these companies in the last few years. Can you tell us a bit more about, what's the larger vision or the strategy that Port Jersey is trying to play out by expanding your capabilities, expanding your footprint? What's the story?
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to a holistic service for our customers, staying in the food realm, obviously growing that footprint, making sure that, if you come to us, it's a one-stop shop from warehousing, case picking, VAS builds, all the way to the delivery at your delivery location of choice. Going into Costco's for VAS builds, like I mentioned, or just direct to dock deliveries, whatever it is that you come to us with, obviously we want to have a solution for you. And honestly, it's based on transparency and providing just a good service.
It's Steven, what's your story? How did you get into logistics?
Yeah, so came out of college, played baseball there, and when I was hired to Continental Logistics, there was a lot of good athletes and background within the logistics industry, and particularly at our company at the time. So everything kind of fell into place. It's not an industry that I intended to be in. Graduated with a sports management degree, and then got an MBA. So it took a different path than expected, but it's been a great ride thus far. No day is the same. I think everyone in the industry knows it keeps you on your toes, and I think that's one thing that I really enjoy about it. You don't know what you're coming into. Obviously, some days are going to go smoothly, and there's other days where you're pulling the fire alarm every few minutes, and you got to react and you got to go. So I think that's one thing that really is exciting about the industry. And it's a great industry to just dive into. Obviously, there's some labor shortages out there that we're all aware of. This is a great industry to get into and really dive in head first and see what it has to offer you.
What was your position in baseball, that is?
Yep, I was a right fielder. So I got to play the outfield, got to hang back a little bit, just caught some fly balls and did some hitting. That was the name of the game for me.
Well, thank you again for taking time to speak with us today here at Full of Ship. I have a few topics I wanted to cover and get Port Jersey and your perspective on. The first I'll bring up is chassis shortage. And the kind of reasons behind this, is it due to empty containers not being accepted, or the chassis not being returned? It's been an interesting topic for the past year, especially around port congestions, delays, pricing increases. I mean, this is one of those key assets that's very much required to move the container once it's off the boat. So from the Port Jersey perspective, Continental perspective, what have you been seeing in terms of chassis availability, and how's that changed from maybe a year ago?
Yeah, this is a major one, and really one of the larger issues that a lot of guys are facing right now, especially anyone who imports, but also just seeing the freight that is brought into the country that affects the ripple effect all the way down to the grocery shelves. Chassis, like you mentioned, they're absolutely the most important piece of moving a container, maybe outside of the tractor itself that picks it up. They are gobbled up right now. Empties are tough to return. There's normally a chassis pool at the ports, which is just your general pool for anyone to come in and use them. Obviously, since everyone's short on their own assets because they can't return any containers, the chassis pool is effectively zero. At any point in time, if you go in there expecting to find one, you're either waiting for hours and hoping someone returns one, or you're probably not getting the container out that day. The biggest thing is, once they're pulled, a lot of the times the ports are requiring you to do a double move to take a container off. So you can't go in and pick up a container without an empty returning at the same time. So there's really no way for anyone to go in and grab a chassis that's new, because you can't get in there without having an empty on the back of one already. So all the ones that are already pulled out of the port are accounted for, and essentially you need to have one to be able to get back in there. Obviously, there's some flexibility there on certain days, or you get lucky and you get in there and there's one available from the pool itself. But for the most part, every single one is accounted for, and if you don't have one, you're searching for a while to find one. That's for sure.
Do we have a sense of whether the number's a full actual number or a percentage? Like, do we have a sense of just how short are we falling in terms of chassis available to meet the need? I mean, does it feel like 50% of the time you can't get a chassis kind of thing, or is it? I'm not even sure how you'd measure it, but what are you guys seeing?
It's tough to put it into. I think it's tough to put it into an actual number, just because. For the most part, I think there are enough out there that if the turn time was better and we were a little bit more efficient just across the board, I think there is enough equipment out there to handle the volume. The problem is, and I'm sure we'll get to it a little bit later, but some of the infrastructure. I just don't think there's the infrastructure's there for the volume that we're seeing right now. A lot of our carriers, our personal carriers that we use, they're ordering more chassis, but they're just like everything else currently. They're back ordered for months, if not, getting close to a year, 2 years. So the demand is out there for them. Chassis are like gold right now. If you can get them, you're in a good spot. And if you can get them empty, you're in a better spot. So I think the assets are there. I think it's just across the board where we're losing a little bit of efficiency and productivity with the ones that we currently have.
Who's performing the best right now in terms of the chassis shortage? Are there some companies that have figured out some plays or strategies that are allowing them to hold on to the chassis longer or get chassis more easily? Like, what are the positions you've seen that are stronger than others in this shortage situation?
Yeah, so I think there's a few ways to answer this one. I'll start with the first one being if you're a dray company right now and you don't have your own chassis, you're in a bad spot. If you are fully relying on the chassis pool to always go in and have one available to be able to pull a container, you're probably not doing nearly as much work as you used to at this very point in time. Just because, like I said, they're gobbled up. There's different size fleets. You can have a small fleet of 5-10 drivers, but if they have 50 chassis readily available to them, they're probably still performing pretty well. Obviously, that you got 5 chassis per driver or something like that. They're not going to be able to utilize every single one every time. You can even do some pre-pulls to your yard and hold them. And as long as you're returning, a few every week, you should never really run out. So the guys that have their own personal chassis, their own assets, and especially a few per driver, those are the ones that are performing the best right now. Obviously, they have a little bit more flexibility. They might be a little bit safeguarded from how hard it is to return empties because they obviously have a little bit of additional inventory sitting behind them. But those are the guys that I personally see performing the best right now. And then, like I said, you'll have your guys that have a few drivers and 1 or 2 chassis per. They're still in a better spot than the guys that have none. But if you have a small window of how many chassis are available to your drivers, you're probably feeling it right now for sure.
And are you seeing any players maybe from another perspective, say like the cargo owner or say the shipper, maybe another provider around the port in some way? Are they having varying positions on managing the chassis shortage?
It's a weird. I mean, the shippers and the owners of the freight are doing the best they can to fight back against anything, right? So if there's a chassis shortage, they're likely getting hit with demurrage if they own the box or own the freight in the box. Or if they're waiting to return them and they can't find an empty location to return them, they're getting hit with per diem on the back end. Not to mention, obviously, you have all the in-between charges, which if it sits out of the port for 13 days and you get per diem, you're also probably getting hit with additional chassis days. All this is going directly to their bottom line. So they're fighting the best they can, whether that's going directly to the steamship line and essentially, saying, how do you want me to control these returns if you can't give me an empty location, or just trying to push the ports to be as flexible as they can, whether it's extending the last free day or anything like that. Unfortunately, outside of being an asset carrier or the ports themselves, with the chassis pool and trying to get more, there's really not much that a shipper or the product owner can do to try to fight the chassis shortage. It's really out of their hands, which is a scary thought for them. And that's why, they fight in every direction that they can go. But outside of the guys that physically order them or have surplus and are finding a way to rotate them quicker than someone else, I don't know if there's much way to fight the shortage at the moment.
And in this process of trying to figure out who pays the bill in the end, what kind of visibility is there around the chassis availability, chassis shortage right now? Like, is the drayage provider actually showing up with a receipt saying, hey, there were no chassis, and providing it to the shipper in some way, who's coming back and be like, well, I'm not going to pay these demurrage fees if I can't get it? Like, what's the common narrative playing out there?
Yeah, it's never fun when it comes to the bill because I mean, no one wants to get additional charges. We don't want to charge our customers more than it should be. They don't want to pay more than they should be. Obviously, they have their margin on their products, and it's a fixed cost most of the time, so they really can't negotiate much on that. Um, there are a few ways to at least back up the truth behind the chassis shortage. You can go into some portals and some ports online, and they'll physically kind of lay out how many chassis are available. Most of the time, it's zeroed out right down the middle. So obviously, you take a screenshot of that, you highlight it all, and you send it over. It's kind of the best you can do in that scenario. It might not be, it's not what anyone wants to hear, but sometimes, if you tell the truth once, you don't need to remember the lie that you told a few weeks ago and hope that the story is still the same. So you got to present the information that's in front of you. And obviously, it might not be the best thing that they want to hear, but it's the truth. Besides that, I mean, there's other ways to track them. You have your TIRs on your way out and on your way back into port. So that shows you when it was pulled out and when it was returned. So obviously you have your gap of how long it's been out of the port. That backs up all the, if there's additional chassis day charges, that's kind of proves that they've been out of the port for X amount of days. And that's where you get your total number from. Besides that, a big thing is just the email correspondence or taking down notes of phone calls that you have with your carriers and making sure that obviously if there are going to be additional charges, you got to have some backup to make sure that it's fully, verified and everything checks out.
Now, maybe moving on from chassis, unless you have any other thoughts to share, maybe we could talk about kind of return locations and what's causing kind of a flood of drivers once one is announced or that information is shared. Before we hop in, any last thoughts on the shortage, or do you see any end in sight to the chassis shortage before we move on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're getting away from the shortage because the return location is still going to kind of involve that and why we're short on them. So I think that's going to be a common theme here. The way that I think a lot of it's waiting on these orders, hopefully, and obviously, I kind of keyed on it before, but I think we need to be a little bit more efficient, and obviously, infrastructure takes a while to get set up, but I think there needs to be definitely some increase in the infrastructure and get up to pace with the volume that we're seeing because at the moment it seems like we're lagging behind, and some of our carriers are saying the same thing, that there really is no way to fix it immediately, that is, and we kind of just got to do the best we can with what we got at the moment.
And this is a little bit of a tangent question. I remember from 5-6 years ago that one of the biggest topics around chassis was chassis quality. Has that just completely fallen to the wayside now?
Yeah. I mean, if it's safe, safety is the number one thing, and you can't push that aside, obviously. But if it is one that maybe in years past you looked at and you said, oh, that's not looking too hot, let me grab another one. If it's roadworthy and everyone is okay with it moving, I'm sure it's in motion right now. You definitely see, we have them in our yard, in our warehouse. There's some ones that have some balder tires than normal. But obviously, if it's getting the job done, I'm sure they're being utilized. But again, number one thing is safety. If something's not roadworthy, it should be taken out of play for sure. And if it's not salvageable, then you got to get rid of it. If you can flip the tires or weld something and make sure that it works, then you can bring it back in play. But it's got to be safe before it hits the road. It has to be.
All right, tangent done. Empty returns, location changes. It sounds like it's bad situation, and then it gets even more chaotic when these empty return locations are changing. Everyone seems really reactive in this topic and generally reducing port congestion overall. It's kind of like, well, let's address something, let's get it better, and then then we'll see the next domino that's breaking in the process, type of thing. So how is Continental Port Jersey dealing with these empty return location changes?
Yeah. So return location, it's been big. There's a few ways to do them. None of them are really that fun, quite honestly. So you have some that you need appointments to return on. Some are only during a certain period of time. And then obviously, like you mentioned, there's changes. One day they could be going back to MAR. The next day they could be going back to APM. It really just depends on where the steamship line wants them. In a way, Continental is, we're the best we can do here, again, is keep our customer in the loop. Without us being, again, we're a brokerage, so no assets on our side. Without us being the ones physically returning the containers, we're not as exposed to the headache that is causing a bunch of, obviously, the carriers right now, but it's still our headache to make sure that we get back to the customer with the correct information. So we check in daily on how our carriers are doing, return and empties. Any updates, if we see a change in location before someone lets us know, our dray team makes sure to get that over to our carriers so they're aware of where to return it. But yeah, this has been something that's a mess recently. So I do have something down here. This was January 1st or January 2nd, I forget. But this is kind of what we had to work with. So these are all your major steamship lines. So CMA, there were no return locations for 40-footers. Maersk, there were no return locations for 40-footers. Hapag of all sizes, there were no return locations. 1, 20, and 40-footers, they're appointment-based. There were no appointments. Yangming, 40-foot high cubes, there were no appointments available. And then MSC opens after 9 a.m. for returns. And that's what you had to deal with. So in this particular scenario, I guess everyone's, you look at that and you say, okay, at least I can return some MSC boxes, but I have to wait until after 9. Everyone's probably in the same thought process, and then you're sitting in the 6-hour line to return the MSC containers. So if you're lucky enough to grab some of those appointments, which some of our carriers do a really good job of, then you might be able to turn a little bit quicker and be a little bit more efficient. But you go down that line just for, everyday carriers, not even guys that we touch. If you're a smaller player or you just don't, you're not quick enough to grab one of those appointments, you're sitting on a box for sometimes multiple weeks. And then you're not moving anything. And obviously you got to move those chassis and make money. So a lot of these guys, it's a never ending kind of domino effect, like you mentioned. It's just one thing after another. You get your chassis emptied, and then you can't get another appointment to get another one, or whatever it is.
And what were the date windows again for those carrier statuses?
So that was as of June 2nd. That was just an update that we had that I pulled before we jumped on here with you, just to give you a little bit of an example. So that's about 3 weeks ago now. But that's just one of the days, and that was one of our carriers that obviously had all of these containers either currently on a chassis or in their yard waiting to return, and that's the update they came to us with. Again, not ideal, but when you take that information and follow it along to your customer, you got to kind of just you lay it all out there for them, and hopefully they feel for a little bit of what these guys are going through. Obviously, there's some, you hear that and there's extra charges, so they're not going to feel too bad. They're going to worry about their bottom line, but just to get a piece of, what these guys are going through, just to try to, move their chassis on their own.
So from what you guys are hearing, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Or is there no change in sight?
Yeah. It's in a way, I don't think it can get worse at the moment. I think we've kind of hit a period where we're kind of stagnant in where we are. I don't think it's gotten better. I don't think it's gotten worse. I don't see it getting better anytime soon, just based off of the volume that's still coming in. I think the volume has dropped a little bit over the past 1 or 2 months, but still well elevated above, your 2019 pre-COVID levels and all that stuff. So the volume that's coming in it's still hot and heavy. Our personal busy season normally comes up, August through October. We do a lot of seasonal foods and holiday calendar and stuff like that. So you get to that holiday calendar period, and normally we're seeing an influx. We're already seeing what we used to call peak season volumes. So I don't know. It's going to be interesting if we're in it and it's just going to stay the same amount, or if we're going to start seeing another big influx. Obviously, some of the ports in China just recently came back online, so that'll start heading our way probably within the next few weeks. but it's going to be interesting. Like I said, I don't think it can get worse. I think we've had enough time to realize the state that we're in, and hopefully we're adjusting to how to get appointments, and if you got to return them, you're figuring out a schedule where you can still be efficient while having to wait until a 9 a.m. return, for example, something like that. So I don't think it can get worse, but it definitely looks like it's going to be a while before it gets better.
Are there things that can be done that can make it a little bit easier now? Like, are there different customer behaviors or booking plans that can be set up that would maybe make it a bit easier? I think you and I were previously chatting about some customers are booking 100 boxes on a single ship,
yeah,
and with no chassis available and nowhere to return the empties. That sounds like a problem.
Yeah, that's another one where it's a tough balance. Some of those customers are booking that much on one vessel because that's what they have available to them. Or similarly, ocean freight is just as high as it's ever been. Obviously maybe a little bit drop there as well, but you're still paying 2-3 times the amount you were to get a box in from China. 2019 levels again. So there might be a little bit of discount for getting that many containers on a vessel. I've never been on the booking side of a vessel, so I'm not 100% sure how the pricing works. But I'm sure, like anything else, the more you ship, the more discount you get. But once that hits port, you're in a little bit of a sticky situation there. If you got, example, 3-4 free days and you have 100 coming in and you got to pull 25 out a day or something near that number, that's a tall task for anyone to try to handle, especially with the current situations that we have and not being able to turn chassis or sitting on empties from your last vessel that haven't been returned yet. So from the shipper side, I think there is probably a few ways to go about it. Spreading out the vessels, of course, booking, what you need. I know a lot of customers like to have a good amount of inventory on hand, a few months extra just in case something happens. I don't think you can stop doing that because that's essential to the supply chain. But maybe you look at your volumes a little bit or your capacity a little bit and try to peel back a little bit where you can, where it makes sense. But outside of that, again, I think the business still has to run the way it needs to run, and you have to have the amount of inventory and supply on hand that you need to be safeguarded against any crazy things that could come up. And obviously, they come up every day. So trying to just find a good balance between shipping what you need and spreading it out and making sure that they're still coming in on time so your fill rate's good and all that stuff to your customers, but helping yourself out a little bit and try to keep those additional costs that could come into play as low as possible.
So you mentioned earlier that much of what you're dealing with is an infrastructure challenge. And I was curious about that. Ports simply not having enough infrastructure to keep up with the incoming volume seems to be the theme. Now, when you say infrastructure, could you give the audience kind of a sense of the breadth of infrastructure? Like, are you referring to hey, there's just not enough berths at the port, or hey, there's not enough assets, meaning like chassis? When you say infrastructure, where are you seeing the greatest bottlenecks at the moment?
Yeah, I think this is at the port level for the most part. I forget what exactly the number was, but if you went down all the ports on planet Earth, and the efficiency ratings and everything, I think the United States was towards the bottom. Maybe not, all the way at the bottom, but it was low, just in terms of how efficient we are for the volume that we have coming in. So, expanding ports and getting more ships to be able to call, that would be huge. And having more room for boxes to come in and be put on port. A lot of the empties aren't getting taken because the ports are full. So that's another challenge. And then you have a bottleneck and a domino effect there because now you have containers you can't return. They got to go somewhere. So they're filling up our carrier's yard. Once the carrier's yard is full, they're asking us to store them at our warehouse. Once our warehouse, slots get full, I don't know where they go. Unless you're trying to find an additional depot that can hold them, or you're trying to buy up, just a flat piece of ground to hold containers. There's a domino effect there. So I think the biggest thing is on the ports and becoming a little bit more efficient. Obviously, technology is a big thing, and trying to get whatever it is, the cranes to move faster, or a little bit better technology in terms of how to unload containers, how to set them up in a good place where they're going to be loaded quickly and they can be loaded onto the ship quickly or unloaded quickly. Just across the board, trying to get a little bit more. The Savannah ports, I think, are doing a lot of big expansions I've seen recently, transloading facilities on site to try to just alleviate some of this heavy volume. I'm sure you're aware. There's been a little bit of a seesaw West Coast to East Coast. So it started in California where you had, I think, 60, 70 vessels backed up and waiting to call. Everyone sees that the West Coast is backed up, so they change their routing
to the East Coast.
and then you got 30 waiting on the East Coast.
When everyone gets the same good idea at the same time, it's less of a good idea.
Exactly. So you have this pendulum that swings, and so some weeks the East Coast will be great, and they'll get in on time, and other weeks you'll have them sitting. There's a backup in New Jersey, New York ports right now. We had a vessel that was ETA'd, I think, for the 18th. It still hasn't called to port yet. So there's definitely we're lower than we should be in terms of efficiency, and that goes for assets too. Like you mentioned, if there were more chassis, if there were more power units, if there were more drivers, there wouldn't be as big of a backup. But I think the biggest thing is definitely the actual port itself. If you're unloading a ton, obviously there's not as much room for empties. If you have a ton of empties sitting there, not as much room for to unload the loadeds. So that's the biggest bottleneck right now for sure.
Yeah. So maybe simply put, there just needs to be more yard space footprint at many of these ports at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think that would be a good place to start. I think there's a lot more beyond that, obviously, but yard space, port security, whatever it is, definitely somewhere that you're able to unload and able to take in some of these empties, even if they're a little early or something like that.
You also were mentioning the shift from West Coast to East Coast and the seesawing. I'm kind of curious, within one coast, have you been seeing much shift between the ports, like as shippers or brokers try to be a little smarter with distributing their inbounds?
Yeah, I mean every port is hitting record number of throughput this year, and obviously last year as well. But big ones that I personally have never really seen with the volume that they're handling recently is Savannah and Charleston. Those are some newer ports that are up and coming, and they are doing some volume down there for sure. Also coming in through Houston a little bit more, especially some of our particular customers that are just getting tired of the waiting. They're bringing them in through Houston because it's a little bit better down there, and they're going to either truck them or rail them, whatever they got to do to whatever distribution center it's going to for them throughout the nation. So I think customers are trying to pull every lever that they can to get a little bit ahead of the game and try to distribute their containers a little bit better, especially the importers, because they're getting hit with some extra charges for sure. And I think, obviously, like you said, everyone has the same idea at the same time. So everyone's getting along and trying to catch on to how they can be the leanest possible they can with their supply chain, save themselves the most money, help their bottom line the most. So there's a lot of ports that haven't been as busy in the past and that are doing some serious volume now for sure.
And I'm also curious, so with all the shifting, all the different parties are trying to find all the levers they could pull. Have you seen much of the kind of strengthened collaboration and visibility lever getting pulled much? Like, are people working better together? Is there an opportunity to work more collaboratively, more streamlined in some way, shape, or form to better utilize or be more efficient with the infrastructure? Are you seeing any opportunities there?
I would say, from a customer to provider level, there's definitely collaboration going on. That's for sure. I mean, everyone realizes that the supply chain in general is in a tough spot. Everybody that's in just involved in the logistics industry realizes that this is tough right now. And like I said in the beginning of the conversation, we never want to give our customer extra charges. Our customer doesn't want to see the extra charges. So anything we personally can do to help them, we're all for it. Whether that's them say, hey, we're not going to send our containers into New Jersey, New York. We know it's backed up. We're going to send it down to Norfolk. Can you find a transloading facility for us and truck it up to your warehouse? And that way we missed the merge. I understand there's an extra cost associated with the truckload up, but we don't need to wait 3 weeks and we don't need to even come into play with port and even test the possibility of getting extra charges there. So between service and provider and customer, there's definitely collaboration going on to try to just figure out the best way to go about it. And also it's just operationally for us, it makes sense. Across the board, warehouses are tight, assets are tight, chassis, like you mentioned, there's not many of them. So anything we can do to try to alleviate the burden of our customer and make their mind at ease, but also help ourselves out a little bit and give a better service, we're open to it. Shipper to shipper, I think there's definitely something to be done there in terms of collaboration. If someone's got some working that's going well, I understand you want to keep your cards tight to your vest right now because of how crazy everything is. You might not want to give away everything that's working. But if you're in a similar, food sector, CPG, whatever it is, and you want to try to help somebody out that's also in a tough spot, I don't see it being that big of an issue. If you got something that's working and it's going well for you, I understand, you don't want to blast it out on, LinkedIn or some forum where there's thousands. But yeah, if something's going well and someone needs some help, I don't see any issue in trying to, share some information of what's going well for someone.
Earlier in the chat, you said it feels like it's peak season now, and it's not even peak season traditionally. And you mentioned that it might just keep feeling like peak season all the time. Maybe that's the new state of affairs. I hesitate to say new normal, but maybe that is just the state of affairs. What's some of your outlook? What's Port Jersey's outlook on what's going to be playing out the rest of this year and next year? Where should brokers, warehouse management, your customers be focusing their attention, you think, for the rest of this year and into next year? Where should they be investing? And what are some of your predictions for the next 12 months?
Yeah. Our outlook, I kind of hinted at it already. We're expecting to go into a busy season again, to a quote unquote peak season. Whether that's more volume than we're currently handling or if it stays the same, soon we'll find out. But we're expecting to see an increase in volume, and we're trying to do the best we can to handle it. From a customer standpoint, I think the best thing you can do right now is, especially if you're in importing and warehousing, is to forecast your capacity and forecast your space in warehouses that you need. Inventory management is huge right now. You don't want to bring in more than you need, like I mentioned before. You don't want to get to a point where you're not selling through as fast as you thought you were, and now you're in a position where your shelf life might be short, and you have a whole bunch of containers coming in, and there might not be space for you in a certain warehouse, or you need to find overflow now. Similar, honestly, to the chassis situation where carriers might be looking for extra yard space to hold some empties. It's there's a little bit of a balance again looking forward. So dray rates, I don't see them going down anytime soon just because of the volume that's still coming in, the overall just circumstances that they have to deal with on a daily basis, the chassis, again, the wait time for port, again. You're not going to see a decrease until these guys can start doing 3-4 turns like they used to be able to in the past. I think everyone is pretty agreed upon that 2 is probably the standard right now, depending on how far away you're driving from port. But you get 2 out, you're having a good day. You get more than 2 out, you might be deemed a unicorn at this point in time. So those rates are going to stay high. Truckload rates right now, they're starting to fall. a little bit of anomaly because of how high fuel's rising. So I know for a fact there's some confusion over that right now. I don't really know personally what to make of it. We monitor, all of our truckload rates for our carriers on a daily basis, and there's some that, it's weird. There's some that run for less than $2 a mile right now, which is kind of unheard of because of the fuel rates. And I guess, your outlook, everything I read, it's kind of we're at where we're at. Volume looks like it's going to stay high. And as far as, I'm aware of, there's not much changing anytime soon. Like I said, infrastructure doesn't just pop up, in a month or so and everything goes back to normal. Like you said, you don't like to use it, but I keep hearing this new normal thing. And it seems like we're in, a state of kind of, I shouldn't say the word calm, but it hasn't changed much over the past 2 or 3 months. It's kind of it hit the point where it was getting bad, and now it's kind of leveled off in that bad state. So outlook, it's going to have to go week by week. I think we're going to have weeks that are good, and everyone's containers come in, and we can pull them off, and we get lucky with appointments, and our carriers are doing a good job spinning boxes, and our warehouses shipping outbound, so volume's good and through. And there's going to be weeks where, a bunch of vessels bunch up together, and collectively we got, hundreds of boxes to pull off port, and we're in a hole. It's just going to be, kind of taking it week by week, day by day, and getting through at each one, and obviously keeping our customers informed along the way of the latest supply chain outlook.
Well, Steven, thank you for your time today. It's about wrap up for our conversation. And I just want to give you a chance to share any final thoughts or comments, anything you would tell the audience that they should be aware of around infrastructure, chassis, port congestion, or maybe just some hopeful encouragement to share.
Yeah, honestly, I think I'm going to take that hopeful encouragement. I'm active on LinkedIn a lot and post some stuff up there, just trying to start some dialogue about the industry. One that I liked recently, just speaking with a few guys that I've met this past year, going to TIA and all that good stuff. A lot of people, it sounds like the world's ending, and I know some of the stuff that I just said over the past 40 minutes, it doesn't sound great. I think this is a good time to, look at technology, look at your process, look at all the things that we can try to, nail down during these difficult periods, and kind of find a new way to look at things and how to really deal with some tough times right now. Logistics is resilient. It has to be. It provides food for all of us. It provides, medicines and all that stuff. So it's an industry that it has to be here. We got to figure out ways to solve problems. And that's kind of what logistics has come, it burns down to at the end. You gotta be a problem solver. You got to find a way to really help out who you're working with and who your customers are. So I don't think it's the end of the world. I think it's a good time to look back, focus on your processes, find some new ways to do things, and ultimately just, we'll get through it together. There's going to be some tough times, that's for sure. And you might have to pull the fire alarm a few times a day, but at the end of the day, it's going to be an industry that's still going to be around, well past all this craziness. So I think it's just a good time to put your head down. You keep grinding, and obviously we'll get it done.
Well, Steven, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for your insights, your comments. We very much appreciate it. The audience appreciates it. Again, this has been an episode of Full of Ship with Steven Weisensee of Port Jersey Continental Logistics and Kyle Henderson of Vision. Thank you all for listening, and stay tuned for our next episode. Thank you again, Steven.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Kyle. Appreciate it.
Our pleasure.
Thank you for joining Kyle and his guest on the Full of Ship podcast. Be sure to subscribe and tune in next time as Kyle continues to demystify ocean carrier tracking with his future guests.